What's going on, everybody? This is Bobby G, back again with another Saturday Shpiel. Again, as you can probably guess, it's a little late out. Not super late, but, sun's setting earlier, so lights come on a lot sooner. Anyway, this week, the title for this Saturday Shpiel for this week is called Get Used to Different. It's a little borrowing from a series called The Chosen by director Dallas Jenkins. If you haven't seen that series, it's only its first season so far that is out. If you get a chance, you can get the app free and all that fun stuff. If you get a chance, ask around. I'm sure you'll find it. But it's a really good take because at one point, spoiler alert for those who haven't seen it, at one point, Jesus says to Peter, the people who play Jesus and Peter, Peter says to Jesus, with regards to a certain situation, this is different, to which Jesus says, get used to different. And it comes out of the passages for the week, for the Torah portions, which comes out of Genesis chapter 23, verse 1 to chapter 25, verse 18. 1 Kings chapter 1, verses 1 through 31. John chapter 4, verses 3 through 14, if you're following TorahPortions.org, or if you're following Chosen People Ministries, it's Matthew chapter 1, verses 1 through 17. Again, you could use all four of those if you like. Usually there's 3 readings in a Messianic congregation. Depending on where you are, it would differ. Also, special note that Rosh Chodesh, which means a new month, will be coming up, and the readings for that are Numbers chapter 8, verses 1 through 15, and 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 4 through 10. But, to the sake of getting used to different, in the case of this, we have, starting in chapter 3, we have Sarah's life, and it kind of talks about who Sarah was, being Isaac's mom and all, and Isaac being the son through whom Abraham's lineage would be called. Also, we have in 1 Kings, we have Bathsheba and Nathan the prophet and a couple others who aren't quite in the greatest position because Adonijah, one of the 6 sons of David, tries to set himself up as king instead of waiting for his father, King David, to decide who is going to be king after him, which, even in them days, is a no-no. Most people know that it takes the monarch who's currently living to decide who the future ruler will be. Otherwise, things get out of hand very quickly, and it seems like that kind of is what Adonijah is doing. So Bathsheba, Nathan the prophet, come to him and say, didn't you say that Solomon, or Shlomo in Hebrew, is going to serve on your throne after you? And David makes it said, while he's still alive, that surely I say to you, as the Lord lives who's delivered me, Solomon will sit on my throne and rule after me. And then in the case of John, we have the well of Jacob, and Jesus meeting with a Samaritan woman and doing things that are very different. Because also going back to Genesis really quickly, Abraham, you kind of get a list of his descendants through Hagar and Ishmael and their descendants, but you also have his other wife, Keturah, that he had as a wife after Sarah had passed, who he married, and she had kids, which may have been Abraham's kids, and, they all had gifts, and they all had, treasures that they were given, but as far as who was going to run the show after Abraham passed, that was Isaac, because Isaac was his main kid, if you will, which that in itself is a whole interesting paradigm. Also in the case of Matthew chapter 1, verses 1 through 17, we kind of get Jesus' lineage going from Abraham all the way to David, and then from David to the exile, and then from the exile to Jesus, which if you look at his lineage, it's a very different way of doing things compared to how the world normally does things. And it's really, really interesting of how things are decided. And, you know, we look at around and his traditional lineage, you look at by wife of her who had been wife of Uriah and all that going on. And, you know, it's not a typical lineage. It's not a typical way that God goes stories, because if you go on throughout Scripture, God oftentimes uses the most unlikely people to get his message across. He uses the most unlikely people to make his message known. I mean, Jesus was the Son of God, yes, in human form, and yes, he was of the lineage of David because of his earthly father Joseph, but he did not typically conduct himself in a manner that people would expect a monarch to conduct himself, especially with regards to Rome. And same thing with how Solomon ended up being king, same thing with how Isaac ended up being the heir. You know, these are things that are not typically seen in the world as things that are normal. God often takes, when you look throughout these passages, when you look throughout Scripture, God ends up doing things upside down compared to the world's standards. And so, I want to ask a question as I begin to wrap this up. Is doing things that are different easy and adventurous for you, or are things that are different scary for you? I ask that because oftentimes I find myself, especially lately, kind of doing things out the box that are not things that I would normally find myself doing. And it's just been a wild ride ever since. All I'm saying is, with these times, maybe instead of the status quo, maybe instead of doing things the quote-unquote traditional American church way, maybe we should start to get used to different, or getting used to different, as it were. And being willing to let God do some new things that either we haven't seen at all or that we haven't seen in a while, at least as far as we're concerned. And hopefully, as we go through these scriptures, as we read through these passages, hopefully things will continue to open our eyes. And, if you ever get a chance, take some time out. If you don't have a Sabbath, which is a day of rest, once a week, maybe that's something that you need to do that's different. If you've never been to church, maybe try that. Could be different. I know it's definitely different with a lot of churches in this time, but like I said, as Jesus said in it's a quote from the series again, The Chosen, sometimes get used to different. Get used to different. Where that'll take us, only God knows. But in the meantime, I hope everybody does well. My name is Bobby G. This is Saturday Shpiel. And Lord willing, I'll be seeing you guys next week. Peace.